Hello, everyone, and welcome to the QT2 Run webinar, How Do I Earn a Spot at the 2025 Boston Marathon? My name is Reem Jishi, and I am the program director and also a coach with QT2 Run. So just as a quick overview of what I'm going to cover this evening, I'm going to start by talking about the qualification and registration timeline for the 2025 Boston Marathon, then go through the qualification standards, hit on some of the top qualifying races, and then go through what factors that you can consider in picking a qualifying race and talk about some race day notes. Okay, so first of all, just setting things up, the 129th Boston Marathon will take place on April 21st of 2025. So to participate in Boston, it's definitely a unique race. There's no lottery for the Boston Marathon. So you either need to participate by qualifying and being accepted, and I'll talk about what that means as we go on today, or by representing an official charity partner, or by special invitation. So not very many people have special invitations. Those are professionals and other people that just get asked to race, but most people either need to qualify or they need to participate as part of a charity group. So if you're looking to qualify, you need to run for 2025. You'll need to have run your race between September 1st, 2023 and the conclusion of registration. We don't know exactly when that is yet. We're waiting for the BAA to announce that, which probably won't happen for a couple of months, but historically it's been the middle of September. Okay, so I'm going to walk through the 2024 timeline because presumably 2025 will look similar to this. So information on registration was announced on June 5th of 2023. The registration window was September 11th, 2023 through at 10 a.m., which was a Monday, through Friday of that week at 5 p.m. So any athlete who achieved a currently valid Boston Marathon qualifying time can submit a registration during that window. So basically all what that means is that you can apply to participate if you've run a marathon within the time frame and you submit your registration on time. So the qualifiers were announced a couple weeks later on September 28th. Okay, so as of now, these are the qualifying standards. They are based on your age as of race day. So as of April 21st, 2025. So if you are currently 44, but you will be 45 on race day, then the appropriate thing is the 45 to 49 age group qualification. So as you look at them here, this has been the age range, or sorry, the qualification standards for the past few years. They changed it in 2019. So this is what it's been since then. So some qualification stats. For this past marathon that just happened, now as I'm recording this, happened just a week ago, the field size, the announced field size was 30,000 runners. Actually only, I think the exact number, 26,596 people actually started that race, but the announced field size was 30,000 people. So a lot more people applied for spots than there were spots this year. So 33,058 qualifier applicants. So that means that every one of these 33,058 people had times that met the minimum standards. Of those, 22,019 were accepted. So that number you're talking about, basically 1/3 of the applicants who applied did not make it this year. So if you look at a breakdown from here, 6,182 qualified by 20 minutes or more, 8,858 qualified between 10 minutes and 19 minutes and 59 seconds, and 6,979 applicants qualified by 5 minutes and 29 seconds to 9 minutes and 59 seconds. That means over 11,000 people were not accepted they ran slower than 5:29 from the qualifying time. So just setting this up more in context, the field size has basically been 30,000 over the years, but I'll talk about some exceptions. So just looking into 2024, you see these numbers I just reviewed. In 2022 and 2023, the field size was the same. Everyone that applied made it in. But if you look at the number of qualifiers accepted, it's not so different than what was from 2024. So it just, at that point, there were less people. We were still coming off of the heels of COVID. There were less people racing. And it just happened to be that there were less people who were applying than there were possible spots for qualifiers. So everyone got in. Going back a little bit, so as I said, the standard of time changed for between 2019 and 2020. So they dropped it before. If you look at 2019, the number was you had to be 4:52 under. So they dropped it. BAA dropped the qualifying times by 5 minutes going into 2020. And the assumption at that point was actually that pretty much if you got under the time that you're going to be in. So there were certainly a lot of disappointed people in 2020 who ran just under, who didn't get in it. But those people ended up being further disappointed because that race never happened. That was when COVID hit, and I was actually one of those people that year that had gotten into the 2020 Boston Marathon and then had to be canceled. So the 2021 race, which ended up to be a much smaller race, had they reduced the field size from the normal 30,000 down to 20,000, and so there were far more applicants based on that time. But if you look at the number of applicants there, 23,824. In a normal year, all of those people would have gotten into the race. But in that particular year, because the field size was reduced, the cutoff time was more significant. So as we look forward now to 2025, there's a lot of questions out there. And I think, I'm not sure which is the more commonly asked question on all the Facebook groups, if it's what the shirt's going to look like or what the jacket's going to look like for the next year, or what the cutoff is going to be. And I'm not really a betting person, but on this one, my bet says that the qualifying cutoff for 2025 is going to be more difficult to get into than 2024. And these are kind of the reasons why. So the top 5 qualifying races in the US for the 2024 Boston Marathon were Boston from this year, or sorry, from the year before. So that would have been the 2023 Boston Marathon. And then these other races are all fall races. So these are 2022 numbers: Chicago, New York City, CIM, and the Philadelphia Marathon. So, and then if we look at these versus 2020 for the 2025 race. So now we're talking the 2024 Boston Marathon and 2023 fall races. If we just exclude Boston for just a minute and look at the other marathons below it, you'll see that in all of those cases that more people qualified for the 2025 race than qualified for the 2024 race. And this is a combination of both, because the field sizes were larger in 2025 for all 4 of those races. And for Chicago and New York City, the qualification percentages were also higher for those races. For CIM and Philadelphia, they were lower, but they were pretty close. So if we now start adding Boston into the mix, when I was looking at Boston a few weeks out, a couple weeks out, when the weather forecasts were first coming out, I'm like, wow, Boston is going to be really fast this year. Westerly wind, perfect for the course. Temperatures seem maybe a little warm, but they seemed, I thought pretty reasonable. But then as we got closer in date, I think that the temperature on race day was higher than anticipated. And that's especially tough in a spring race because no one's planning for it. You don't heat acclimate for Boston because you don't assume that Boston's going to be warm. So if you look from the 2023 race over half of the people that ran Boston in 2023 qualified in 2024. Now, if we look at 2024 into 2025, the number was 42.7% of the people who ran Boston qualified for the 2025 race. So the numbers are lower there, but it's still extremely significant. So now when I've told you that for 2025, there's 30,000 total runners that will be allowed into the Boston Marathon. Of that, somewhere around between 23 and 24,000 in general will be people who qualify. And you look at just these 5 races, these are the top 5 US qualifying races. If you look at just these 5, you're already at almost 29,000 people. Now, that doesn't by any stretch mean that everyone who qualified is going to apply for the Boston Marathon. It doesn't, but it just tells you that looking at these numbers, if I look at the 2024 number, that's at 26,000. So it's a good, another 10% of people qualified in these 5 races 1 year later. So in addition to these races, these are the most popular US qualifying races. We also have quite a few other big races out there. I mean, internationally, the other 6-star races are on this list. So Tokyo and Berlin and London are big qualifying races. And then there's several other races that you can participate in to qualify. So I'm going to just jump to that right now on how you pick a qualifying race. So let's say you still want to run this year. You still want to be able to apply this year for the 2025 race. There's still plenty of races out there. It can basically be any marathon. So the first 2 are kind of what the thing is. It has to be a certified course. So when you go to sign up for a race, just make sure that it's a certified course. So that means that either US track and field or the foreign equivalent must certify the exact distance is 26.2 miles. And then it meets other qualification criteria. And all that means really is there has to be at least 3 or more competitors. It's promoted prior to race day, that there's a timing device, and that it's an outdoor race. So pretty much anything that you're going to sign up for is going to meet those criteria. So other things when you're considering this is that you want to look at the date of the race. If you're looking at trying to qualify for the 2025 race, it's pretty much between now and generally the second weekend in September is the last date. So most of the big races are in the fall, but there's still certainly plenty that go through around Memorial Day and then like into the late summer, early September. There's still plenty of races out there, and a good place to find the potential races is if you go onto the Find My Marathon website. There's a list of Boston qualifier races, and you can just go down there and see if you can find one that makes sense for you. So some of the other factors to consider are the number of runners. So this is something, do you like a big race? Do you like a lot of people out there? The big races have certain benefits to them in that you're always running with people. That's really exciting. There's often very good support. There's good race logistics. Everything's worked out. Like there's pacers usually on the course. So those are things that people tend to like about big city races because there's just amazing energy that goes with them. But there's also some downsides to big city races. They are logistically, although organized, they tend to be challenging. They often you have to wake up earlier. It takes more effort to get to the starting line. The first couple miles tend to be out of your control because there's so many runners that it's really hard to be able to run the pace that you want to run. So there's downsides to it too. There's no right or wrong answer to most of these questions. It's just you thinking about what kind of race you think is beneficial to you. The next thing to consider is the weather. As we're looking now, we're getting into, you'll still have some nice spring races, but unless you've already signed up for one, you're not going to be thinking about just hopping into a marathon in a couple weeks. So as we get into the summer, you're starting to talk about warmer weather, which is generally not as ideal for running. Most people run their quickest races when it's in the 40s or 50s. So weather does become a factor if you hit the starting line and it's 70 degrees outside, which happened in Boston this year and was actually one of the reasons why the New York City numbers were lower last year, was because the weather conditions were very warm that year. So if you now just sort of looking at other things with weather, is that it's often beneficial to train in similar weather to what you're racing in. So this is one of those things. If you live in Florida, it's hard to pick a cold winter race, but if you live in New York, it's hard to go down to Miami and run in the heat, or Houston or LA, you know. So it helps to be able to train in what you're going to be racing in. The next thing to consider is the type of course. There's one ways like Boston, out and back races, loops and looped courses, turns. One ways, well, a looped course is kind of fun to be able to do that, depending on the number of loops and if it's something that you like. But a course with a lot of turns tends to be a course that's harder to race only, to run only 26.2 miles on. So that's something to consider. One-way courses have add logistical challenges because you have to get shuttled either to the start or the finish. So you want to be thinking about that. Out and backs are kind of nice because you get to see runners, but I have to admit that sometimes it's hard if you're towards the front of the field and you turn around, you're not seeing people for a while. And if you're towards the back of the field, you see how many people are coming back at you. So it's one of those things. Some people like them, some people don't. Again, there's no right answer here. It's just something to consider. The next point is terrain. So in general, the quickest races are either downhill races, which makes a lot of sense, or flat courses. So if you're looking to PR a hilly course or looking to get a time, a hilly course is not going to be your best bet there. The next thing is road surface. So asphalt's going to be quicker than a packed trail, even though a trail race may be more comfortable to run on, is generally not as quick. Start time is another thing. A race like Boston or New York, you may not be starting till 10 or 11 o'clock at night, although you have to, or 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. Although you do have to wake up early to be able to get there for that start time. But there's other races that start at 6:30 or 7 in the morning. And that's another thing to think, like, when is the time that your body functions the best? So just as you're looking at races, if two races are equal and one starts at 6:30 and one starts at 8, and you generally don't do your runs till 8, that might be a relevant factor in there. The next thing is vibe, and I kind of hit this when I talked about small versus big races. Do you like to be out there running more on your own? Do you like a small town field? Do you love the crowds and want to see them around you? Something just that you want to think about. There's races out there that have bands every mile. Is that something that's interesting to you, or would you prefer to have the solitude of the race? The next thing is pacers. A lot of races offer pacers. And some people like to run in pace groups, some people don't. Of the most popular qualifying races, Boston's really the only one that doesn't offer pacers. So there's pros and cons to it. Sometimes, like, I personally like to run with pacers maybe for the first half of the race and then go off and do my own thing. They kind of keep me, I'll pick a pacer that's slightly slower than I want to go to keep me controlled in the first half, and then I go and I do my own thing. But sometimes pacers don't hit the times that they're supposed to, and sometimes running with a pacer. I did one race with a pacer where he didn't stop at all, ever, to take in any food. He just kept running through every aid stop. And so I found that to be challenging to try to figure out how I was going to stay with the pace group when I was stopping and picking up my fuel. And so it's just something to think about. Do your research, figure out if that's works best for you. The course support, and here, this is again, bigger races tend to be better supported, but you might want to look at what kind of fueling is on the course, what's available to you, if it's a drink that you like to use or not, because it's something that if you go and you look and you see that the drink on the course is something that you really don't like, it's a factor that you might want to consider, because you generally do not want to have to carry all of your own, and in some races you can't carry enough with you. It's just not possible because they won't allow you to use camelbacks or similar. So, and other things on the course, like how often are the aid stations? What kind of gels or shots or something like that are available to you? Are there enough? Is there ambulance support? I mean, that's something we don't want to consider, but if it's a warm day or something happens, it's nice to know that there is support out there for you. And course support too. Partly the crowds, are they important to you or not? The next form here is logistics, and so I've mentioned this in a few other points, but is if it's a one-way course, you have to think about how long it might take you to get to the start and what's going to be involved in there. Last year I ran the Marine Corps Marathon, and it gave you an option to get dropped off. And I was staying with a friend of mine that lived in DC, and it was an absolute nightmare. We couldn't get anywhere near the starting line, which only caused like tremendous amounts of panic. She ended up dropping me off at a metro stop, and I took that and I got in, and it worked out okay. But the logistics were complicated there. And so it's just one of those things you want to think about. Like for big city races, Philadelphia is one of the easiest ones. There's so many hotel options that you can just walk to the starting line, and parking in a parking garage in the city is also something that's possible to do. And if you can take away some of the stress of pre-race morning, that makes a difference. The next point is whether or not there's another race that's going on at the same time. So often you'll have a marathon and a half marathon, or maybe a 10K going on, or with Marine Corps, a 50K that's going on at the same time. And these can play out different ways. Sometimes the marathon and the half start together, and then the halfway through will peel off and go finish its race. And that can be tough, because if you're running with a whole bunch of people that all of a sudden pull off and are going to finish a race, and you know that you still have half of your race to go, that can be mentally something that's difficult to deal with. Conversely, there's other races where the half will start at the midway point of the marathon, and you think, oh, this is great, there's a lot of new energy that's in here. But people running a half tend to be a heck of a lot fresher with the 10K to go than people are running the full. And so that can be difficult when you start getting past a lot towards the end, if you're getting tired towards the end of your marathon. And then there's races that will mix them in, start them together, finish, and then peel off and join back together. It's just something that's important to look at, and to think about how having a race that's going on at the same time may or may not impact the dynamic of your marathon. And then the final thing is location. And here, thinking it's kind of fun to have vacation races, but vacation races do add to the travel stress. They add to the cost. Sometimes really easy to just do the race in your hometown or something that you can drive to. Again, no right answer, no wrong answer, just something that you should consider, that when you're picking a race, really think about what it's going to take to get to the race, and how that might impact how you perform on race day. Okay, so now you've picked your race, and having looked at the earlier slides from today, that you need to hit the minimum of a certain number, and that may or may not be good enough. So as you're looking at how you race on race day, everything counts. There's so many decisions that can make a difference, of 3 or 4 minutes along the way, that have nothing to do with how you've trained for the race. So I just want to talk about some of these. The first one is how you decide to pace a race. So on the Find My Marathon website, they have where you can do a race calculator on there. That's nice. We also at QT2 Run, we have some good race calculators on our website. But when you think about this and you think about the approach, how do you want to do it? Do you want to start out fast and hope you can hold on? That's kind of the banking time approach, which in general doesn't work very well. If you bank time, you end up losing far more than you saved at the beginning. Do you want to run an even pace race? Even pace ones work if it's a flat course, don't work so well on a hilly course. Even effort is one where your pace is going to vary around, but your effort stays the same. Or do you want a negative split? Do you want to start out slower and build as you go? And in general, people will run their best races as either even effort or as negative split races. So to start out a little more conservatively and build as you go. But that's just something that you want to have that plan before you go into race day in terms of how you're planning to race it, whether it's, and also within this to know, are you pacing based on power? Are you pacing heart rate based on speed, based on your perceived exertion? Have a plan and just stick with it. Are you going to do a run walk approach? And this could be like a very specific, I'm running for 4 minutes, I'm walking for 15 seconds, or it could be, I'm just going to walk through my 8 stations. But again, if you're doing this, have a plan. And if you are planning to take walk breaks, you need to know in advance how that's going to work into your average pace. And here I'm going to direct you to the QT2 Systems website, because we have a great run walk calculator, which will tell you, I want to run a 3:45 marathon. My walk pace is this. This is the run walk interval that I'm planning on using. It will tell you how fast you have to run in order to hit your overall target pace. So it's a really useful calculator. Decide on if you want to run with a pace group or not, or maybe for some of the race. And I think it's also important to think about if you're planning on doing your best race or if you're trying to BQ. If you think about the slide that I presented earlier with the number of people that didn't get in, a third of the people who applied for the 2024 Boston Marathon were essentially within 5 minutes of their qualification time. So there were a lot of people that were just barely making it, which is an amazing thing to do. But it's one that if you look at this, that with the timing, if you're trying to BQ, sometimes that means that you take risks because you have to in order to try to get the number. Well, if you're looking to race your best race, you might approach it a little more conservatively and then push it at the end. But it's just something to think about. If you think you're on the bubble, that's really more where it plays out. The next point I want to hit here is overrunning the course. I don't know how many times I have seen athletes and seen within myself where, yes, a marathon is 26.2 miles. It is certified according to the shortest course out there. Most people do not run the shortest course. They don't run the tangents right. They go pretty long around the turns. They're weaving in and out of runners that not only takes energy, but it also adds distance to your races. They're crossing across the roads to go to 8 stations. All of that adds distance. So there's plenty of times if you think you're going to run an 8-minute pace, let's just say for a half marathon or for the marathon, and you run an extra 0.5 of a mile, which is not unheard of at all, that just added 4 minutes to your race. So you really going through it, it's really important to look at the course and to think about how you're going to hit the corners and to be conscious of really trying to minimize the time that you're weaving in and out and the extra distance that you're on the course. So some other things to think about when we put our stuff into the race calculator, we say, this is the time I'm going to average. First of all, I recommend that people, when they use race calculators, instead of doing 26.2, that they do 26.4, because no matter how hard you try, it's really tough to run the perfect race, especially those big city races in the first 2 miles. You can't take the line that you want. There's no way. And you are inevitably going to be dodging and weaving around people at the beginning before you can find some open space. So first thing is put 26.4 into the calculator instead. And then think about some of the other stuff that comes along the way, because if it comes out and you say, I need to run a 7:37 pace for the race, well, that's great, but there's things that might slow you down along the way. If you grab something at an aid station, that takes a little bit of time. Are you going to do walk breaks, whether they're planned or unplanned? If they are planned, then make sure that you're putting it into the calculator to figure out how much quicker you need to run during your run segments. Are you going to need a porta potty stop? Most people don't want to assume that that's going to happen, but it happens along the way. You might need to. Even running and giving a family hug or slowing down to give someone a high five, it's possible. And these things matter if you are within, that 5-minute time frame of the qualification window. The next thing is on your fueling. And this is something that you should have a fueling plan for how you're going to tackle the race. And not only what you're going to drink and eat, but when you're going to do it, and have it and practice it and nail it. Because on race day, you don't want to be trying anything new. You don't want to be doing something that you haven't been routinely doing during your training. You don't want to pick up nutrition on the course that you've never tried before. You really need to have it nailed, because nutrition is something you have absolutely control over, but something that people mess up a lot of the time, that they don't focus on. They don't nail their nutrition, and it can make such a huge difference. And this is also, here I'm talking about race fueling, but also just how you eat the week leading up to the race is important too, and making sure that when you hit race day that you're really well hydrated going into it. So the last comment here is for race day notes, is that if your goal is to qualify for Boston, there are some reasons to reevaluate that strategy. And that's if you've had injuries leading up to it, or if you're currently injured on race day, if you've missed a lot of training, or if the weather ends up being way warmer or colder than you anticipated. Because training for a marathon takes a lot out of you. Actually, racing the marathon takes even more out of you. So you're going to have to, you can't just do a race and then say, okay, next week. Well, maybe you can. And I've known people who the next week go out, they run back-to-back marathons, but 2 or 3 weeks later, it doesn't work. So you have to go out, and you might have to push a race that's later. So if these things are coming in and your goal is to qualify for Boston, you might want to reevaluate your race and pick something different. So that's what I have for you today. And I want you to thank everyone for joining on this webinar, and please reach out to me if you have any questions at all. I have personally raced Boston. I've coached a number of athletes who have raced Boston. I've spectated. It is an amazing race. It's such an experience to be there. And I hope that if you're watching this, that you will have the opportunity to toe the line in 2025. Good luck, everyone.